All right, so this time I want to talk about the question, can you learn martial arts from a book or videos or other instructional material outside of actually taking classes? And I'd say the answer is no and yes. It depends on how you go about it. If you basically just, well, sit on your ass and read a book and expect to unravel the mysteries of that martial art and become a great master, yeah, not going to happen. Obviously, we can all agree on that, I'm sure. Sometimes people ask me, can you learn sword fighting on your own without a partner? And, well, I have to say no. Can you learn boxing on your own? Well, sort of, maybe a little bit. The basics. You can learn, basic footwork, basic cuts and thrusts, punches, kicks, whatever, that sort of thing. But of course, you generally have the problem that there is nobody to correct you. So if you misinterpret the techniques and you keep practicing that, then, well, you're just gonna entrench yourself in something that wouldn't really work. And the problem is you can't test it. You can't practice it against someone else who offers a certain amount of resistance because, well, you're on your own. So basically, you could practice it as an aesthetic art form, say, and there are plenty of, well, so-called martial arts. I mean, it's basically just aesthetic styles, Wushu, for example, is really very far removed from actual combat techniques. And you don't have to take that from me. I don't know much about Asian martial arts, I freely admit that, but if you want to learn more about that, you can actually go to the channel of a friend of mine, Sword Sage. I'm going to link his channel down below, and that's one of the really interesting things about his channel. He talks about, practical Chinese martial arts, because a lot of the stuff that you see out there is really, well, forms that aren't really applicable to fighting in that way, and you also told me that, quite often you do have actual combat techniques in forms. Sometimes techniques were conveyed by means of, well, code, basically. It could be a poem, even. It could be, integrated into a flowing form that when you just look at it, it's just random, twirling and jumping and spinning around and whatever, and you don't really see it. And even if someone else were to copy those movements, they wouldn't be able to fight with that. But they still contain the techniques. Like if you split it up and if you know what to look for, then you see the actual techniques that could be used in a real fight. So yeah, again, Sword Sage, check him out. Definitely good stuff. But it is actually possible to learn fighting from just manuals. I mean, HEMA has proven that, Historical European Martial Arts. Those guys started out with really nothing but the medieval and Renaissance manuals that were written about fighting at the time. There was not much of a living tradition to speak of. I mean, yes, you have Olympic style fencing, foil and épée, military saber fencing, maybe something like Highland broadsword, but for example, longsword fighting wasn't really a tradition whatsoever. But yet they managed to study the historical manuscripts and figure it out, and now we have a pretty good understanding of how people fought back then. So it is possible. It has some drawbacks. Like specifically, it's slower than learning from an actual expert, a master. And nowadays, if you want to get into historical European martial arts, it's also a lot easier to take classes and learn from someone who already knows their stuff. I mean, I know the frustrations of trying to figure it out on your own without access to local classes because there are none. But at the same time, there is still material out there. Like YouTube is pretty full of experienced HEMA practitioners, and there is a lot to be had there. So that's, the next best thing to having a teacher. There is still the issue of interpretation, because there are very often multiple possible interpretations for the historical techniques shown. because, well, you just have one picture and some text. Like what that typically looks like is, something like this. You have, a single picture. There is not really a sequence of pictures as you would have in modern martial arts books. Like if you take this, for example, there is, an actual sequence with arrows to indicate the direction of the movement and very detailed description, which you don't have in the historical manuals. However, it's still possible to go by the text and the picture. If you know the basics, you can actually tell a lot from the picture. Like in this case, for example, if you look at the positioning of those two, you can actually tell who attacked. Like the guy on the left side has the right leg forward, and according to the text, he is the one who threw the cut, and the other one has the left leg forward. And you can tell because the guy on the right obviously took a step to cut, because they start out at a distance where they cannot hit each other without closing in the distance. So there is a lot of information to be had, and when you actually try to figure that out with a partner and you go through the movements, and if there are multiple possible interpretations, you just try out the different options, and then you'll figure out if you expose yourself, for example, to easy counterattack, or you will see that, for example, depending on the leg placement in this position, well, you simply cannot throw them, or whatever the text says. So the first step is basically to try to understand the technique, interpret it, and try to figure out, does that work this way, that way? What seems most plausible if you go through it with a cooperative partner, and then you can try it against a resisting training partner, sort of free sparring or semi free play, whatever. And then you figure out, okay, if your opponent actually tenses up and resists and pulls against it, things of that nature, can you actually make that happen? And that also makes it a lot slower to learn, as opposed to taking classes from a competent practitioner who has already understood these things and already has a pretty good idea of with what works and what doesn't. They will still operate on interpretations, of course, but their experience has shown them what they can pull off, basically. So there's some empirical evidence behind it, if you will. So yeah, it is possible. It's slower, it has its limitations, but you can actually learn from books, manuscripts, and especially videos. Well, moving pictures are of course something that people didn't have back in the day, so it's definitely something that we can benefit from nowadays. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about this. So yeah, let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.